Okay, it's recorded, yes. Just a reminder, December 10th is the Christmas party. It's a Sunday. It's going to be at 5 o'clock. If you're local and want to go to the symphony concert, that's from 2 to 4. So there's plenty of time to go to that and then come to the Christmas party. It's going to be a potluck for those of you who are not here. And if you have any desire to come, let us know. There's so many people that I know would share a room for one night. So don't do it because you don't think, you wouldn't have a place to stay. So let us know and we will, I'm going to put out a save the date, and I'm also going to put out, it's going to be a potluck. So, and we're going to have our patio and our garage done by then.
God willing. We will have the patio and the garage done by then.
So indoor and outdoor party. Where are we? We are on chapter 16, and we're in that fourth section of how Matthew has divided up his gospel. And this fourth section is on what are the expectations of the Messiah. And so, what did the Jews think the Messiah was going to be like? What did the non-Jews think the Messiah was going to be like? And today we're really looking at what the disciples thought the Messiah was going to be like. And we left off we should start on verse 13, but I'm going to skip ahead to verses 20 and 21. So chapter 16, verses 20 and 21. And then we'll go back. Then he, that's Jesus, admonished the disciples not to tell anyone that he was Christ. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life.
So I asked Mary for permission to take something out of order today. That's always hard. But I've mentioned several times that after going through all of these gospels, I realized that there was a point where it's almost like, the light went off and you could see that Jesus said, it's time to head to Jerusalem. And he begins to, insult the Pharisees, the Sadducees. He begins to say things much more directly, much more harshly, and it makes them angry enough that by the time he gets to Jerusalem, they're prepared to kill him. And some of that's just based on observation, but Matthew just says straight out that, first of all, he tells them not to tell people that he's the Christ, that he's the Messiah. It's something that came up last week. There are people, as Mary keeps saying, that this is divided up. This section is about how people perceive Messiah and how they react to it. And there are people that if they believe that he's Messiah, to them, Messiah means a king who's going to come kick out the Romans and put them on top for a change. And if they think that's what he is, they'll start raising an army. They will. I mean, that's the thing. The Romans, two things the Romans want: money and peace. They don't want anybody to rock the boat. There's a phrase, Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. They don't like people to stir the pot. And if they think there's any kind of an uprising, they come in and shut it down, and they do it brutally. That's what they use crucifixion for, probably more than anything else, is if you disturb the peace of Rome. And I'm trying to put these pieces together for you. The next thing it says is that from then on, Jesus began to show the disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things, and die and be raised on the third day. So Matthew says, from this moment, he began doing this. So as we go through stuff today, keep that in the back of your mind, that we've reached that point where he's about to kind of change his tone, and he's preparing to pack up and head to Jerusalem. And it'll make some of these other things probably either make more sense or at least be a little more alive for you.
So now going back to where we left off, chapter 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he questioned his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he admonished the disciples not to tell anyone that he was Christ.
So there are parts of this that have stoked fights, arguments, maybe wars even, I don't know, but over centuries and now millennia. And we realized this week, we're not gonna settle the arguments in this class. We're not going to persuade anybody who's not already persuaded, and we're not going to indulge in those fights. Jesus starts out asking them. He knows people are talking. What does everybody say? Who do they say I am?
I'm gonna interrupt 1 second. He's at the, since Israel is such in the news these days, and you probably see more maps of Israel than you've had your whole life. To me, it's interesting to realize he's in the region of Caesarea Philippi. He's on the coast now. He's basically gone from the Sea of Galilee. He has gone west to the coastal region. Anyhow, I just remember going to Caesarea. It's just a beautiful place. Go ahead.
So who are they saying I am? And some say John the Baptist. That seems kind of odd. John hasn't been dead very long. But if you remember, Herod says that's who he is. He says it's John, like resurrected, or they're nearly the same age. Some say John the Baptist. Some say Elijah is the next one. So others still say Jeremiah, one of the prophets. There is this scripture that says that in that day, Elijah will come. And this has been dealt with. We studied it here in Matthew, where Jesus actually tells people, if you're willing to accept it, John is the Elijah who was to come. It's not Elijah, it is someone in the same role as Elijah. And so in this section, Jesus talks about that in one of the Gospels. But people are saying he's a prophet. When we were in Israel, there's a festival they just got done with. It's called Sukkot. And they build these booths, these sort of tents. And every night they have a dinner, and they set a place at the table for Jacob and Abraham, different nights, a different one. I think we had dinner with which one was it? We had dinner with. But they do. This is kind of crept into their belief system. So people are saying he's a prophet who's come back to tell them something. And he says, yeah, okay, all right, that's what other people say. What do you say? And here's Peter. And this is what I love about Peter, is that he thinks first, or he talks first and thinks second. Peter just blurts out. But you see, he's right, but he says, you're the Messiah, you're the very Son of God. And Jesus tells him, you're right, and you're blessed because you didn't figure this out on your own. God revealed this to you, and it's correct. And up until then, we get everything.
We all agree.
We all agree. This makes sense. And then he says, I tell you that you are Peter. Now, his name in Greek is Petros. And Petros means a stone, a rock. And so it's sort of a turn of words. He says, I'll tell you, you're Petros, you're the rock. And on this rock, I will build my church. And there are people who say that means it's built on Peter himself, and they're adamant about it. And that's the fight I'm not going to participate in. I don't think so, but I'm not going to fight with anybody who does. If you read it, there are two words in the same sentence. Petros, you are Petros. And I tell you, on this Petra, I will build my church. It's two words. You don't use two words in one sentence unless you mean two different things. I don't think anybody ever does that. You may tell someone, get in the car, go to the store, and they have a truck, and we all understand. But you never say, go get in your truck when they drive a Honda Accord. Nobody does that. Nobody ever does that. And Matthew uses two different words, Petros and Petra. Petros is like a stone. Petra is like bedrock. That's just the nature of it.
So what is he trying to say there?
Well, I
And
can
then
only,
you say, well, you're going to say what you believe that this means.
yeah, I am absolutely dancing about this. That people fight with each other over this. And there's a more important part of this.
Well, and
that
I'll
is-
say, as raised a Catholic, the Catholics believe Peter was the first pope, and that he is who the church was built on. Let's just not skip around. You're going to explain what we believe, and everybody can.
I don't
Yeah.
think that Jesus is saying the church is built on a man. I don't think that. But when I look at these words, if someone wants to take it that way, I can't shout them down. But I don't think that Jesus was saying, I think he's saying on this rock, which is what he just said was revealed by God, that he is the Son of God and he is Messiah. And on that, I will build my church. Here's the thing that gets left out. This is people have fought so much over that piece of it. They miss the fact that he says, on this, I will build and the Greek word is ecclesia. We've taken that and it's church, but it's more than that. It's a gathering. Ecclesia, literally as a prefix in a word, and it means to be called out. That the church that we think about, the universal church, are a people called out. That's the word that gets used. That's what Matthew recollects and relays to us. And the funny thing is, he's not building a kingdom.
Right.
The kingdom of God already exists. He's not building that. He's building a group called out, an ecclesia. And in all the argument over this other part involving Peter, we miss out on the fact they would have recognized ecclesia. They would have understood what was being said. And if they're expecting a king, he's telling them, that's not what I'm building. And that gets lost in this, in all the fighting over Peter. What he's telling them is, on this, I will build my church. I will build this ecclesia, this group of people who are called out. It's an important thing that he's telling them. I don't think that's built on one person. But let's go on. I mean, this is where he tells Peter, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And that adds to this belief that Peter himself is what is being discussed. I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And there are people who take that to mean that Peter's word is law, that Peter is able to make pronouncements, promises that God has to keep. I don't subscribe to it, but again.
And that is where the belief of the infallibility of the Pope came from this section.
It's based on that.
Correct.
Now, that word to loose and to bind goes way back into Old Testament, and it has, typically it's used more of what is permitted and what is prohibited. There's a point where Peter gets a vision. If you remember, he's up on the rooftop and he has a vision, a dream of a sheet coming down from heaven. And on it are all of these animals that are prohibited under kosher law, under the diet laws. And a voice says, take and eat. And Peter, being a good Orthodox Jew, says, no, Lord, I've never eaten anything like this. And he gets told, nothing that I've made is bad, just to paraphrase. And Peter, after this, has to go back and say, guess what, boys and girls? We're not going to enforce the kosher laws on these Gentiles. I mean, I had a vision that said that.
And that vision appears in Acts after Jesus has died and been resurrection. So this is early church.
And so here is, to me, an example of exactly what this says, whatever you permit. But you notice that Jesus says, I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. What's been locked will be opened. When? He's not saying he's doing it now. It happens later. He says, this is a very much a future tense. I mean, I spent time on this, but here we go. And he says, there's another place, I'll go ahead and mention it, where there's this big argument over whether all believers must be circumcised. And Peter and Paul have sort of a fight over it. I mean, Paul dresses him down, and Peter comes back and says, no, you know what, you're right. And so Peter winds up being the first, one of the first, but a big leader in the church, the universal church. And he does make some of these pronouncements, and they are valid. So whatever this means, however you want to go with on it, there is a word from Jesus that because of his confession, saying you are the Christ, you are the very Son of God, this is going to be the foundation for everything that comes after. And then at that point, he admonishes them. That means he tells them really emphatically, do not tell people that I'm the Messiah. Don't tell them. Yes, sir.
So again, to just reiterate, so when you say, when the passage, and on this rock I will build my church. So we're talking about, your belief is that on that rock is Jesus Christ. Because many places, we talk about the cornerstone, and the cornerstone of a building is the most important one, and he is Christ. So that's what you're saying you believe, right?
That is what I'm saying I believe. We emphatically saying I believe. And there are other places where a stone is talked about, and it's always Jesus. And Peter has said, I say you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God. And Jesus says, you're right, but you didn't figure it out. God told you. And on this rock, he said, you may be Petros, you may be a stone, but on this rock that we're talking about is what I'm going to build the church. Absolutely, and it's him. And he says, next, don't tell people I'm the Messiah. I am absolutely convinced it's because what will happen, he's not declaring himself as a king. And then right behind that, you want to go on since.
And this is sort of ironic. So Jesus has just told Peter, you're blessed, you're right, you got this right. And then listen to what happens right after. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests and scribes, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Far be it from you, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men.
This is, and I'm sorry if we're taking too much time on this, but this is some crazy stuff. I mean, he's just gotten through telling Peter, you're blessed because of this. And right behind it, that's that piece that we started with. He said, from that moment, he tells them he's got to go to Jerusalem and suffer and be killed and be raised on the third day. And it says that Peter took him aside, okay, and rebuked him. I mean, you got to have a picture of this. This is not something that a disciple does to the rabbi. It's not done. And what does that tell you? I don't know. What it tells me is that at this point, Jesus says he's going to die. Peter thinks he's certain he's the Messiah But in Peter's mind, the Messiah is not somebody who's getting killed. He's the guy who comes in and does the killing. He's the king. And so while Peter has the words right, his concept of Messiah is still not there. And this happens a lot. It happened a lot when I was in business world. And what I used to tell people is if I use the word dog, I say dog, and I'm thinking about Fluffy, who was my pet and my best friend growing up, the little Pekingese. And you hear the word dog, and this is in business, this is the audience, and somebody hears it, and they're thinking about the big giant pit bull named Butch who ate their cat when they were kids. We both have a word dog, and they represent two vastly different things to us, right? Messiah at this point represents very vastly different things. You got something?
Yeah, I got it. So is the idea of Messiah being the king, the warrior that's gonna, defeat the Romans and put the Jews back up on the top pedestal? Is that something that was instilled in the law, or was just some kind of made up thing that some, Pharisee or Sadducee made up sometime long time ago? One.
That's one, and you got another one? You got another one, okay. It is not something directly out of the law. The law of the prophets, the old scriptures say things, and people have this real propensity to hear what they want to hear, to have it mean what they would like it to mean. And the more I read, the more I look at this, the more consistent I realize the old scriptures are. And yet we tend to take that and say, well, it means this, because what the Jews really want is somebody who will come in and get justice for them.
The second thing is, you just mentioned that Peter was very sort of, I don't know, he would speak before he would think.
Yes. Yep.
And so we know the what was the event? Was it in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus came to be taken by the soldiers, and he takes out a sword and slashes somebody's ear off, and all that stuff. So I heard I can't remember where, but I heard a sermon where in some analogy was being made about people who go to church and have emotional moments, I guess you would say, but yet they don't stay in the word, so they don't become knowledgeable of the word.
Mhm.
So it sounds like Peter was an emotional kind of guy, because to go ahead being told that, yeah, you got it right, and this was told to you by my father, and then him pulling Jesus aside and saying, no, you ain't gonna die, what are you talking about? That's not gonna happen to you. I mean, so he sounds like he's like this kind of real emotional type of dude that flies off real quickly with what he's thinking and not taking time to understand.
I hope the rest of you can hear that. I hope it's not blank, but he's talking about Peter being emotional and how there are people that come to church that have an emotional response, but maybe don't stay in the word. And it's true and there's a place for both.
Mhm.
Sadly, the emotional, they serve a purpose within the body. Peter did tend to be that way. Peter, in fact, we're going to see in the next section, Peter says something that's absolutely comical, because he does. He just blurts out and we're even told in one of the Gospels that he spoke because he didn't know what else to do. So yeah, I mean, that's who Peter is. But Peter is also he's a rock. He's very, very solid. So while sometimes he gets himself into a little bit of trouble with it, yeah, you got to remember, there's a point where James and John, the two brothers, somebody insulted them, they didn't believe, and they asked Jesus, do you want us to call down fire from heaven on them? These are like the rest of us, these are flawed vessels. So yeah, Peter tends to be emotional, but he also tends to do some just marvelous things. And he does, maybe it's because he's open that way. Jesus says, God revealed this to you, but he was listening. Maybe.
Well, and I think one of the big points as we're looking at the different expectations of the Messiah, the understanding here that the disciples' expectations of the Messiah, even with the belief that he was the Messiah, the Son of God, they did not know what that meant. And when Jesus tells them that he's going to die on a cross and be resurrected, you have to realize at that point they have no idea what that really means.
That's what it says to me. I mean, Peter dresses him down and says, no, I don't want to hear you talk like that anymore. You're not going to get killed. This will never happen to you. Once again, I think Peter needs to believe that because his vision of Messiah, this doesn't work for him. And you notice Jesus' response, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. Does anybody want to tell me what stumbling block is? Scandalon. We got it. We got that word down. You are, and the scandalon is a snare. It is the oldest version. It's a baited stick that you use to set a trap. And he's saying, you're trying to set a trap for me. It says it's because your mind isn't on the things of God. Your mind is on the world of humans. You're thinking like a man. You're not thinking about God's kingdom. And Matthew, all through this, I've gained a new respect for Matthew this time because he talks about this kingdom of heaven over and over and over. It is absolutely the theme for Matthew's gospel. And he says, you're thinking about the kingdom of men, not the kingdom of God. So here you've got a guy that's just been told, I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And the very next couple of paragraphs, Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. If there's one reason to think perhaps it doesn't mean that he literally has he's in charge of the kingdom of heaven. That's a pretty good one. But again, I don't want to argue about it, but you see that response from Jesus. This thing that he's going to do, there's an Easter time. Usually we study this at Easter, but he's going to be crucified. But he's going as a sacrifice to literally take on sin that he's never experienced. And sin is what? It's a separation from God. He's going to a place to be separated from God somehow for the first time. This would be terrifying.
Yeah.
So don't think that this response that he has, you're setting a trap, you're a stumbling block to me, is because of being beaten and tortured and crucified. What he's got to do is going to require a will that we can't even put into words. And he's saying, Peter, you're trying to tempt me. You're trying to set up a situation where I might become the kind of king you want and not the Messiah who's starting a church. This section is loaded. It really, really is. But it is a takedown of Peter that he takes his rabbi aside and dresses him down.
This Peter, when you heard it out, you're the very Son of God. Jesus says that's coming from my Father.
Yes.
That statement is coming. I'm not sure Peter ever understood that. So it's my dog and my dog, the two analogies. We're talking apples and oranges here. He's talking about what I know, Peter. What I know is you're going to kill my guy. I'm not going to let you do it.
Yeah.
That's the king of law of man, kingdom of earth, not the kingdom of heaven. I'm not sure even at this point, Peter has an understanding, even though we're trying to say, what is the kingdom of heaven going to look like?
Well, he doesn't. He doesn't. And we're told that. We're told that they remember things down the road, and it makes sense.
And these gospels were written 30 years later. And it's interesting to me, when you read the different gospels, how they decided to put them in a certain order and what was important to recall.
But it's a proven point of Jesus' teaching. He's really teaching us.
Well, it's true.
right?
He's teaching us as well, yeah.
Peter is great for right now, but hey, I've got a bigger mission here. And that is the kingdom of heaven. So I feel sort of bad for Peter, but I think that when he said those words, he believed to the best of his ability.
Absolutely believe to the best of his ability. But let me be real clear so I'm not leaving any gray area here, okay? When Peter says, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God, and Jesus says, that was revealed to you by God himself,
Right.
by the Father. And then the very next thing is we see him blurting out these words that say, you're not going to be killed. We're not going to let that happen. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. He's saying that was revealed to you by the enemy, by Satanas, those words came to you from Satan. He's not saying that Peter is, but he's recognizing, he is acknowledging that that's where that thought process comes from. So here's Peter, blurting out these things, and there's no mistaking what Jesus tells him. That didn't come from you either.
But that's the duality of Jesus the man and Jesus the God.
Yeah.
And we all missed it.
Well,
And this is still today. We got, and then we put in the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. You're in a world of hurt here, trying to understand. So it gets me back to, you gotta believe. And I think that's the saving grace for Peter.
he does believe.
Verse 24, and I'm only going to read to 27. There's in chapter 16, there's 28 verses. Remember the other thing to remember, there was no verses in chapters, and 28 should have gone with 17. Okay. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for a soul? For the Son of Man will come in his Father's glory with angels, and then he will repay each one according to what he has done.
So he's just got through telling them that he's going to go to Jerusalem and suffer and be killed. And he says, if anybody wants to follow after me, all right, great. Yeah, this sounds like fun. Think about really what's being said here. He's going to go to Jerusalem. He's going to be suffer and be killed. And he says, if any of you want to follow after me, you're going to have to pick up your cross and follow. And they know what a cross is. This is a thing the Romans did, and it is so, it's not totally exclusive, but it is synonymous with Rome. And the idea was a way to kill somebody that was gruesome, and it took time, it was public, and it wasn't instant. So everybody had to see this. They're making an example out of people. You disturb the peace of Rome. You dare to rise up against us. This is what happens. You see this, folks? But the other thing they did was they marched them down to to the place where the cross was set up, and they carried the cross themselves. This big wooden thing. I've been carrying a bunch of big wooden timber this week. Let me tell you, it's no fun. These big heavy things that they took, and the design of that is to parade them through the street in humiliation. And he's saying, if you want to follow after me, you're going to have to pick up your cross. And you want to come with me, you have to pick up your cross and follow. And it is an amazing foreshadowing of how he dies. I mean, he hasn't mentioned a cross at all yet. And here he pulls this up and says, if you want to come after me, pick up your cross. And he says this thing, and it's, I think it's pretty transparent. What does it benefit someone if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? And that word is soul. I mean, that's exactly what it's saying. Or with what could you pay? What could you offer to pay for your soul? How could you buy it back? So if you want to chase after money, or power or prestige or whatever else. What good does any of that do you if you lose your soul? And this is the continuation of him saying, you're going to have to pick up your cross and follow me. He's never said it's going to be easy, and there will be times that it's especially not easy.
So now I'm going to start on 28 and go through the first part of 17. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. After
You
6,
want to stop right there for a
yeah,
second?
yeah.
Take that verse out of context. Just take that verse all by itself. Some of you right here will not taste death until you see the Son of Man come in his kingdom. And I have heard people speculate and just go, nuts on trying to explain that because they're threatened by it. Because obviously he hasn't come back yet. And we know those people are all dead. So how can this be right? Mary clued you in. She said, this verse, there were no chapter breaks. Take this verse and couple it with what comes next.
After,
Or the word death is on a different level. It's not the body.
Well,
Yeah.
read what comes next, and I think you'll see this.
I need to go back to the opening of 16, talk about the Pharisees. I want to hear that.
Well, let's go to this and put this together with the next.
After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared before them, talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While Peter was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell down in terror. Then Jesus came over and touched them. Get up, he said. Do not be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, so you got to put these together. He says some of you here won't see death until you've seen the Son of Man come in his, how does he say, coming in his kingdom. And what is his kingdom? This is the kingdom of heaven. This is the kingdom of God. Some of you, not all of you, and it's not the idea that some of you won't die. It's the idea that some of you are not going to see what some of the others see. And we move immediately on. A few days later, he takes 3 of them up this mountain with him, and they see him transfigured. And that word, the Greek word, it literally means to change form. He's transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And this is the part where suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared before them talking with Jesus. We're told in another gospel. Do you have that reference?
About what Peter says, first of all?
Well, no, about what they're talking about.
Yeah, I did, just a second. I'm not sure which one.
Well, let me move on. You can come back to
Okay.
it. He says that he sees Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. They see. And Peter blurts out, Lord, it is good for us to be here. That's what's known as whistling past the graveyard. Okay. It's good for us to be here, right? I mean, it's okay for us to see this, right? He says, and I tell you what, if you want, I'll put up 3 shelters. Now, these shelters are Sukkot, Sukkah. They're the ones I was talking about, the booths that they put up during this festival, where they set a plate for Elijah and for, Moses and a different one every night. And I'll put up some shelters because I know when I see 3 glowing guys, my first thought is they're going to need a place to sleep, right? You probably need a tent. And I'm just the guy for the job. I mean, Peter, and we're told, I think it's Mark, or maybe it's Luke that actually says, Peter just blurts this out because he don't know what to say. He just doesn't, he's just at a loss. And this is just
And
nerves.
that part is it's in both Mark and Luke. It says, I'm in Mark 9, verse 5. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For they were also terrified that Peter did not know what else to say.
Peter didn't know what to say. So it's good. And how about if I go over here and build something while you guys, and we're told that they're actually discussing his death, Jesus' trip to Jerusalem and his death and the sacrifice.
And that is in Luke, chapter 9, verse 28. About 8 days after Jesus had said these things, he took with him Peter, John, and James and went up on a mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became radiantly white. Suddenly, 2 men, Moses and Elijah, began talking with Jesus. They appeared in glory and spoke about his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem.
So all these pieces coming together, what we've been telling you, that we've reached a point where Jesus is about to head to Jerusalem for the sacrifice. And there's, I think, I can't remember now if it's Mark or John, I think it's Mark, where he talks about the fact that Jesus actually tells them, you guys, I already covered this. John was the Elijah. And he says it a second time. I mean, he comes right out and says, I already told you.
It's coming up.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So they see this. Go back to that last verse in 16. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Well, there you go. 6 days later, they see Jesus in this transformed state, talking about his upcoming departure is the way that it's phrased to us, but his upcoming death. They see him coming in his kingdom, and they don't taste death before it. I mean, I think it's as simple as that.
And why Moses and Elijah? Why do we think it was Moses and Elijah that Jesus was there? So Moses, to all of these people, represented the law. And Elijah represents the prophets and the law. And that's how Orthodox Jews or conservative Jews thought of the Torah. They called it the prophets and the law and the prophets. And, one of the things that we listened to one sermon and it did hit you, how did Peter, John, and James know that was Moses and Elijah? But anyhow, it's an interesting thought.
It's not,
Yes.
okay, so again, translation form, please. So 28, truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until the Son of Man, before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So then he takes Peter, James, and John,
He takes some of them, yes.
Some of the ones.
those 3,
Yes.
to show them the Son of Man coming in his kingdom.
So it
Right.
appears.
That's
So Peter, being the smart guy that he says, let me build you a tent.
Yes.
Not understanding that he got basically given a death sentence, whatever this death, this is not spiritual death, this is earthly death.
Yes. I suppose that, yeah, it's not spiritual death, clearly. He does show them this thing. He brings them along to see it. You're going to say something because you may answer it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in Jewish law, don't you have to have 3 witnesses for something?
Two.
Two witnesses, yeah.
Yeah, you have to have 2 witnesses.
Two.
But he brought them along we can sit and speculate about the reason for bringing those 3 versus the others. I don't really know. We're not told. And the idea of how did they know that was Elijah and how did, and that was Moses? I don't know.
Could it be the same way that Peter knew that he was the Christ?
That would be my
Yes,
answer
yes.
irregardless.
Yeah.
Jesus himself is transformed. How do they know what was going on? This is being revealed to them for a reason. They would later then recount this and say, hey, we saw this before it actually happened. Yeah, I don't think it's any more complicated than this is a revelation. This is going to be something that will be more meaningful down the road.
Verse 9, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, do not tell anyone about this vision until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. The disciples asked them, why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, Elijah does indeed come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but they have done to him whatever they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man will suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist.
So here's a good example. There are times that we're told things, there are times they're told things, and we don't get it right away. And in Matthew, we just got through, a while back of him saying, if you're willing to accept it, John was the Elijah who was to come. And now we get this, they're coming down from the mountain, and he says, this is the Son of Man come in his kingdom. And they're going to argue with him. They're going to question him. Well, wait a minute. How come the scriptures say that Elijah has to come before any of this happens, before the Son of Man comes in his kingdom? And Jesus says, Elijah does come. But I'm telling you, Elijah already came. He's already told them that. Remember, they didn't get it. John is the Elijah who was to come. And he already came, and these people didn't pay any attention to it. The ones who are going to punish me, beat me, and kill me aren't going to pay any attention any more than they paid to John.
And then he says in verse 13, then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. He didn't understand it when we did it several times.
Oh, okay,
before.
now I get it. Yeah,
Yeah, now I
right,
get it.
Now I get it. That's the way these things work. That's the way they work with me, is that there are times something doesn't make sense, and somewhere down the line, the tumblers click, and I go, oh my gosh, wait a minute. If that happens, don't feel bad. You're in good company. And by that, I mean Peter, James, and John. But now at this point, they get it. John was the prophesied Elijah, actually Elijah, that my God is Yahweh, but he is the one that comes and points the way, makes the road straight for Jesus. And the people in the temple, the leaders, they did whatever they want to with him, and they're going to do the same with me. And remember the point where Jesus tells folks, the servant isn't greater than the master. So if they're going to abuse me, what do you think they're going to do to you?
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to be nice to you? If they'll do it to me, they're going to do it to you. And that's exactly what this is.
That's it.
That's it.
Mhm.
Are we done?
We are done.
It's 9:58.
Yes.
So a whole bunch of things now are coming to this point, this nexus point where everything is going to change. And you see it, especially if you put all the gospels together. He knows at this point that the time is at hand now. And he's going to beeline to Jerusalem. And he actually does this really weird path that he takes, where he crosses to the other side of the Jordan, because as it happens, that land belongs to Herod too. And we're going to see a whole bunch of prophecy, a whole bunch of things come to fruition beginning now. This is the point where it starts. Anything else? Okay. Feels sort of anticlimactic today. God, we see through these words. Maybe we understand a little more why you inspire different people to record different words. And we get a different view, but put together, you have left for us an amazing, amazing account And you've showed us that Jesus being sacrificed was an intentional act. You showed us that they didn't take him against his will, that he went there willingly, knowingly, directly to that final act in Jerusalem. And we're thankful for the words. We're thankful for the understanding that we seek you, we look for your will, we look for your presence, and yet we don't always understand right away. And that together, as a group, you allow us to fill in gaps for each other. You allow us to give our own side of things until we understand better. Be with us this week. Remind us of these things. Remind us that Jesus goes to the cross for us. Amen.
Amen. You guys have a great week. And I was bummed I missed you last week, Diane. Come
Yeah, I
back in
missed
early
you.
December and visit those grandkids so you can visit us in person again.
I know. Well, if I
Naya,
could
you
come
could come
every
visit
month,
your
I
mother
would.
that.
What's that?
Yeah, Naya, you could come visit your mom at the beginning of December. I know you guys have got a lot coming on. Naya's daughter is in the Air Force and she's a pilot and she's getting her plane and graduating the 17th of November. So, and then Naya's husband is retiring from the Air Force after a lot of years 32 years. So Naya's got a lot going on and Carol's going to be doing some traveling, visiting them. So
We used to prepare for these Christmas parties when we lived on the water and we had that porch that was on the, right there on the bay. And it seemed like every year we would count down and there would be this cold front come in and it would drop 30 degrees and we'd have 30-mile-an-hour winds. Hopefully this is a little better protected. So.
yeah, there you go. And hopefully we have a backyard by then. Anyhow, no pressure on Scott.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Good week.
Mary, when is that Christmas party? I missed that date earlier.
December 10th at 5 o'clock. So it's a Sunday. It's the same day as the the symphony comes, but they're from 2 to 4. So you can do both.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you guys have a good week.
Just a little bit of sour